Torn by bullets, Ethan found shelter by a fire where a woman chose to save him. He vowed she'd be mistress of his home by spring, but shadows from his past loom close. It happened in a desolate valley where every step echoes death. Their bond is a fight for life, where truth outweighs bullets. Learn how one man's oath changed everything, and decide if promises hold on the edge of the abyss. Ethan trudged down the rocky slope, his boots crunching against the dry gravel of the valley. Blood seeped from a gash above his ribs, staining his worn leather coat. Each step sent a jolt of pain through his body, but he kept moving, driven by the stubborn will that had kept him alive through worse. The sun hung low, painting the Wyoming hills in shades of red and gold, but Ethan barely noticed. His eyes scanned the horizon for the men hunting him. 3 riders, maybe 4, their shadows dogging his trail for days. He'd lost them in the high passes, but they'd find him again. They always did. He clutched his rifle tighter, the weight grounding him as his vision blurred. Months alone in the mountains had sharpened his senses, but now exhaustion dulled them. The air smelled of pine and dust, thick with the promise of a cold night. Ethan needed shelter, a place to clean his wound before it festered. He spotted a faint trail of smoke curling above the trees, a sign of life in this forsaken place. His gut told him to avoid it. Strangers meant trouble, but his body screamed for rest. He stumbled toward the smoke, one hand pressed against his side. The cabin came into view, a sagging structure of weathered logs, half claimed by the wild. A woman stood outside, chopping wood with steady swings. Her dark hair was tied back, and her face, lined with grit, held a sharpness that said she'd seen hard days. She froze when she saw Ethan, her axe still raised. "Who the hell are you?" she called, her voice steady but edged with suspicion. Ethan raised a hand, showing he meant no harm, though his rifle didn't exactly scream peace. "Name's Ethan. Got a problem with my side," he said, nodding toward the blood soaking his coat. "Need a place to sit a spell." "Won't stay long." His words came out rough, each one a fight against the pain. The woman lowered her axe but didn't relax. Her eyes flicked to his wound, then back to his face, weighing him like a butcher sizes up a cut of meat. "Your trouble," she said, not asking. "Maybe," Ethan admitted, meeting her gaze, "but I ain't here to bring it to you." She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, heavy as the mountain air. Finally, she jerked her head toward the cabin. "Get inside before you bleed out on my dirt." Ethan nodded, swaying as he followed her. The fire inside crackled, warm against the chill creeping into his bones. He sank onto a stool, the room spinning. She watched him, wary but steady, like she'd made a choice she wasn't sure about. Something in her eyes, grief, maybe, or defiance, told Ethan she wasn't just hiding him. She was hiding too. The fire snapped in the cabin's hearth, casting flickering shadows on the rough log walls. Ethan sat hunched on the stool, his coat open, revealing the bloody mess of his side. The woman, who hadn't given her name, knelt beside him, cleaning the wound with a rag and a bowl of hot water. Her hands moved with practiced care, but her jaw was tight, like she was holding back a storm of questions. The sharp sting of whiskey she'd poured on the gash made Ethan hiss, his fingers digging into the stool's edge. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the cabin's loose shutters. She didn't look up as she worked. "Saw a poster in town last week," she said, her voice low but pointed. "Man matching your face worth $200, dead or alive. You gonna tell me what that's about?" Ethan's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. He'd known this was coming. Nobody helped a stranger without wanting something, even if it was just the truth. "Old trouble," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Got mixed up with some folks who don't forgive easy. Ain't proud of it, but I ain't lying either." She paused, the rag hovering over his skin, her eyes locking onto his. "You bring those men here, I'm dead too," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Ethan nodded slow, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. "If I stay, I'll make it right," he said. "By spring, you'll have a home, not just the shack." "That's my word." The promise slipped out before he could stop it, raw and heavy, like a stone dropped in still water. Her face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, maybe, or hope she didn't trust. She went back to cleaning the wound, her silence louder than any question. Ethan watched the fire, his mind clawing at memories he'd buried deep, betrayals, blood, and a life he'd tried to outrun. The woman tied a strip of cloth around his ribs, tight enough to make him grunt. "You don't owe me nothing," she said finally, standing up and wiping her hands on her apron. "But if you're lying, I'll turn you in myself." There was no malice in her voice, just the hard truth of someone who'd learned to survive alone. Ethan leaned back, the pain in his side dulling to a throb. He didn't know her story, but the way she carried herself, steady, guarded, like a wolf ready to bolt, told him she wasn't just hiding from the world. She was hiding from something worse. Staying here was a risk for both of them, but leaving now would kill him faster than any bounty hunter. He closed his eyes, the fire's warmth pulling him towards sleep, and wondered if his promise was a lifeline or a noose. The cabin's single room felt smaller as night settled in, the fire's glow barely holding back the dark. Ethan lay on a pallet of blankets, his breathing shallow, the pain in his side a constant pulse. The woman sat across from him, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes, the scrape of metal filling the silence. Her name was Clara, she'd said earlier, tossing it out like it didn't matter. But Ethan caught the way her hands tightened on the blade when she said it, like the name carried ghosts. Outside, an owl hooted, its call sharp against the quiet valley. Ethan's eyes traced the cracks in the ceiling, his mind dragging up memories he'd rather forget, faces of men he'd trusted, blood on his hands, a life left in ashes. "I ain't always been like this," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the fire's crackle. "Used to have a place, people who counted on me. Lost it all to bad choices." Clara didn't look up, but her sharpening slowed. "We all lose something," she said, her tone flat but heavy. "Question is, what are you running from now?" Her words hit like a slap, and Ethan's jaw clenched. He wanted to snap back, to tell her she didn't know him, but the truth stung worse. "I ain't running from death," he said, forcing the words out. "It's the future that scares me." Starting over, knowing I'll mess it up again, Clara set the knife down, her eyes meeting his for the first time since she'd bandaged him. "You're scared of living, not dying," she said, her voice cutting through the haze. "That's why you're out here, bleeding in my cabin." The air between them crackled, not with anger, but with something raw, like two people seeing each other's scars for the first time. Ethan shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. He wanted to argue, to push her words away, but they stuck, burrowing deep. Clara leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her face half lit by the fire. "I've seen men like you," she said. "Always chasing something, never sure what. But you don't get to drag me into your mess without a fight." Ethan held her gaze, his chest tight with more than just pain. He saw defiance in her, but also a flicker of something softer, buried under layers of distrust. "I ain't asking you to save me," he said. "Just don't give up on me yet." Clara didn't answer, just picked up her knife and started sharpening again, the sound steady as a heartbeat. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and Ethan felt the weight of her challenge settle over him. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. Morning light sliced through the cabin's warped shutters, painting stripes across the dirt floor. Ethan stood by the door, testing his strength, his bandaged side aching with every breath. Clara knelt outside, showing him how to hold her old revolver, its grip worn smooth from years of use. The valley around them was quiet, save for the rustle of dry grass and the distant caw of a crow. Ethan's eyes kept darting to the tree line, half expecting his hunters to burst through. Clara noticed but didn't comment, her focus on the gun in his hands. "Keep your arm steady," she said, adjusting his grip with a firm touch. "Aim low, or the kick'll throw you off." Ethan nodded, squinting down the barrel at a rusted can perched on a stump 30 paces away. He fired, the shot echoing off the hills, and missed by a foot. Clara didn't laugh, just handed him another bullet. "You're not hopeless," she said, her voice gruff but patient. "But if they come, you'll need to hit more than air." Ethan reloaded, his fingers clumsy from pain and lack of practice. They spent the morning like that, her teaching him the revolver's quirks, him trying to ignore the way his wound burned. The air smelled of gunpowder and sage, sharp and alive. Clara moved with a quiet confidence, like she'd been born to this hard life. "I wasn't always out here," she said suddenly, as Ethan took aim again. "Had a husband once, thought he'd keep me safe. He didn't." Her words hung there, heavy as the gun in his hand. Ethan lowered the revolver, looking at her. "What happened?" he asked, not sure he wanted the answer. Clara's eyes stayed on the can, her face unreadable. "Doesn't matter now," she said. "Point is, I learned to protect myself. You need to do the same for both our sakes." Ethan felt the weight of her words, not just for him, but for her too. He raised the gun again, fired, and clipped the can's edge, sending it spinning. Clara nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "Better," she said. "Keep at it." As the sun climbed higher, Ethan's strength waned, but he kept shooting, driven by her words and the truth they carried. "If they come," he said, his voice low as he reloaded, "I won't let them touch you." "I swear it." Clara looked at him, her expression caught between doubt and something softer. She didn't reply, just pointed at the can, urging him to try again. The valley stayed quiet, but Ethan felt the clock ticking, each shot a reminder that trouble was closing in. He wasn't just fighting for his life now, he was fighting for hers too. Darkness cloaked the valley, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. Ethan crouched by the cabin's window, his rifle resting on the sill, eyes straining to catch movement in the black. Clara sat by the fire, her revolver on her lap, cleaning it with a rag. The air inside was thick with the smell of wood smoke and tension. Then it came, a sharp crack of gunfire, not far off, slicing through the night like a blade. Ethan's heart kicked hard, his bandaged side throbbing as he tensed. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his, wide with the same realization. They'd been found. "They're close," Ethan muttered, his voice low, barely above the fire's crackle. He shifted, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. Clara stood, gripping her gun, her face set like stone. "How many?" she asked, moving to the door, her steps silent on the creaking floor. Ethan shook his head. "Can't tell yet. Maybe 3, maybe more." He'd seen their kind before, men who hunted for money, not mercy, the kind who'd burn the world to get what they wanted. Clara peered through a crack in the wall, her breath steady but her knuckles white. Ethan watched her, seeing the fear she hid behind that hard exterior. For the first time, he noticed the way her hands trembled, just slightly, when she thought he wasn't looking. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice rough with guilt. "You can still walk away." Clara turned, her eyes flashing. "Walk away and what?" "Let them kill you, then come for me." "I'm not that stupid." Her words were sharp, but there was something else in them, loyalty, maybe, or defiance. Another shot rang out closer now, followed by the faint thud of hooves on the ridge. Ethan's chest tightened, not just from the pain but from the truth he couldn't shake. He'd brought this to her door. He forced himself to stand, ignoring the dizziness that threatened to pull him down. "Get behind the table," he told her, nodding to the heavy oak slab in the corner. "If they come through, you shoot first." Clara didn't argue, but her look said she wasn't hiding for long. The night grew quieter, too quiet, the kind of stillness that screams trouble. Ethan gripped his rifle, his pulse loud in his ears. He saw it then, in Clara's face. A flicker of the same dread he felt, not just for the fight, but for what it might cost them both. He'd promised to keep her safe, but as the hoofbeats grew louder, he wondered if he'd dragged her into a fight she couldn't win. The cabin felt like a trap now, and for the first time, Ethan's resolve cracked, his fear for her sharper than the pain in his side. Flames licked the night sky, the old barn across the clearing swallowed by fire. Ethan and Clara crouched behind the cabin's wall, the heat stinging their faces even from a distance. The acrid smell of burning wood filled the air, mixed with the sharp tang of gunpowder. Shadows moved in the flickering light. 3 men, their silhouettes stark against the blaze, rifles in hand. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle, his wound screaming with every movement, but he pushed the pain down. Clara's breath was steady beside him, her revolver ready, her eyes locked on the figures. One of the men stepped forward, his voice cutting through the crackle of the fire. "Ethan, you sorry bastard, come out now and we'll make it quick." The words dripped with venom, and Ethan recognized the voice. Jasper, a man he'd once called a friend. The betrayal still burned, sharper than the wound in his side. "You stole everything from me," Jasper shouted, his rifle glinting in the firelight. "Took my share, left me for dead." "I'm just taking what's mine." Ethan's jaw clenched, memories of that blood-soaked night flooding back. Choices he'd made, lives he'd ended. "I didn't steal nothing you could keep," Ethan called back, his voice raw but steady. "You sold us out, Jasper." "That's on you." The truth felt heavy, like a stone in his chest, but he wouldn't let it break him now. Clara glanced at him, her face unreadable in the dim light, but her silence said she was listening, weighing every word. The fire roared louder, sparks drifting like fireflies, and Ethan knew they were running out of time. Jasper laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You always were a liar, Ethan. But tonight you pay." A shot rang out, splintering the cabin's doorframe inches from Ethan's head. He ducked, pulling Clara down with him, her arm warm under his grip. "Stay low," he whispered, his heart pounding. She nodded, her eyes fierce, but he saw the flicker of doubt. She wasn't sure they'd make it. Another shot cracked, closer, and Ethan's mind raced. The barn was gone, the cabin next if they didn't move. He scanned the clearing, spotting a narrow path into the trees. It was a risk, but staying was death. Jasper's voice came again, closer now. "You can't run forever, Ethan." Before Ethan could answer, a shot exploded from Clara's revolver, the blast deafening in the tight space. One of the shadows dropped, a scream cut short. Ethan stared at her, stunned, as she lowered the gun, her hands shaking but her face set. The firelight caught the sweat on her brow, and for a moment, Ethan saw not just defiance but something deeper. Regret, maybe, or resolve. The fight wasn't over, but that shot changed everything. The barn's flames roared, painting the night in angry reds and oranges, the heat pressing against Ethan and Clara as they crouched behind the cabin's splintered wall. Clara's hands still shook, the revolver heavy in her grip, her eyes fixed on the spot where the man she'd shot had fallen. His body lay still in the dirt, a dark shape against the firelight. Ethan's chest tightened, not just from his wound, but from the weight of what she'd done. The air smelled of smoke and blood, thick enough to choke on. Jasper and his remaining man were out there, their shadows shifting in the haze, waiting for a clean shot. Clara's breath hitched, her face pale but set, like she was holding herself together by sheer will. "I didn't mean," she started, her voice low, cracking on the words. She stared at the gun, as if it had betrayed her. Ethan reached out, his hand brushing her arm, steadying her. "You saved us," he said, his voice rough but firm. "You did what you had to." But his words felt hollow. He saw the cost in her eyes, the way they darted from the gun to the body, like she was seeing herself for the first time. "I ain't a killer," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her fingers tightened on the revolver, knuckles white. Ethan wanted to say something, anything, to pull her back from that edge, but Jasper's voice cut through the night again. "You're done, Ethan," he shouted, closer now, his boots crunching on the gravel. "And that woman with you, she's dead too." The threat landed like a punch, and Ethan's guilt burned hotter than the fire. He dragged Clara into this, and now her hands were stained because of him. She snapped her head up, her eyes meeting Ethan's, no longer soft but blazing with something fierce. "I ain't dying for you," she said, her voice steady now, like she'd made a choice. She checked her revolver, her movements sharp, practiced. Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Then we fight," he said, gripping his rifle, though his side screamed with every move. He felt the weight of her act settling between them, a new barrier built on blood. She'd saved him, but at a price neither could ignore. The fire's crackle mixed with the distant howl of wind, and Ethan knew they had minutes, maybe less, before Jasper closed in. Clara's shot had bought them time, but it had also changed her, and Ethan saw it in the way she held herself, tighter, harder, like a woman who'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. He wanted to promise her it'd be okay, but the lie stuck in his throat. Instead, he checked his rifle, ready to face what was coming, knowing her strength was all that kept him standing. The fire's glow faded to embers, leaving the valley cloaked in shadow, the air heavy with the stench of charred wood. Ethan stood by the cabin's door, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his face set despite the pain clawing at his side. Clara sat at the table, her revolver cleaned and loaded, her hand steady now, but her eyes distant, like she was still seeing the man she'd killed. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the faint creak of the floor as Ethan shifted his weight. He'd made a decision, one he knew she wouldn't like. "I'm going out there," Ethan said, his voice low but firm, like he'd already argued it in his head. "Draw them off. Give you a chance to get clear." Clara's head snapped up, her gaze sharp enough to cut. "You're half dead already," she said, standing, her chair scraping against the floor. "You go out there alone. You're not coming back." Her words weren't soft. They were a challenge, laced with something close to anger. Ethan met her stare, his chest tight with guilt, and something heavier he couldn't name. "I brought this mess here," he said, adjusting his coat to hide the fresh blood seeping through his bandage. "I ain't letting it end with you caught in the crossfire." The truth burned in his throat. He owed her more than he could repay, and this was the only way he knew to try. Clara stepped closer, her boots loud in the quiet cabin. "You think running off makes you a hero?" she asked, her voice low, cutting. "You promised me a home by spring. That don't mean nothing if you're dead." Ethan looked away, the weight of her words sinking deep. The fire's last sparks reflected in her eyes, fierce and unyielding, and for a moment he saw the woman who'd risked everything to patch him up. "I'll be back by dawn," he said, forcing the words out, knowing they sounded hollow. "You stay put. Keep that gun ready." He turned for the door, but Clara grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said, her voice softer now, almost a plea. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes, and slipped out into the night. The cold air hit him like a slap, the valley silent except for the rustle of leaves. Ethan moved toward the ridge, his steps heavy, each one feeling like a goodbye. Clara's words echoed in his head, mixing with the promise he'd made by the fire. He didn't know if he could keep it, but he'd try, even if it meant facing Jasper alone. Behind him, Clara watched from the window, her silhouette still, and Ethan felt her gaze like a weight, urging him to come back alive. The canyon's walls loomed high, jagged shadows cutting into the starless sky as Ethan moved through the dark. His boots scraped against loose rock, each step a jolt of pain through his wounded side. The air was sharp with the scent of damp earth and pine, but his focus was on the faint sounds behind him. Hoofbeats, low voices, the hunters closing in. He'd led them away from Clara's cabin, but now the narrow pass felt like a trap, its walls funneling him toward a reckoning. His rifle hung heavy in his hand, slick with sweat despite the cold. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead, blocking the path. Ethan froze, recognizing the lean frame and crooked hat of Silas, a man from his old crew. Silas's grin was all teeth like a coyote sizing up prey. "Thought you could outrun us, Ethan?" he called, his voice dripping with mockery. "You wanted a new life, huh? You were always doomed to end like this." The words hit harder than Ethan expected, digging into the doubts he'd carried for years. He tightened his grip on the rifle, his heart pounding. "I didn't run from you," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the pain. "I walked away from your kind of poison." Silas laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Poison?" he spat, stepping closer, his hand resting on his holster. "You betrayed us, took what wasn't yours, and left us to rot. Now you're preaching about a clean slate." Ethan's jaw clenched. Memories of that night, blood, lies, and a choice he couldn't undo, flashing through his mind. Silas drew his pistol quick as a snake, but Ethan was faster. He dove behind a boulder as a shot cracked, the bullet ricocheting off the rock. His side screamed, blood soaking his bandage, but he forced himself to move, circling through the dark. Silas kept talking, his voice taunting. "You can't hide forever, Ethan. You're already dead, you just don't know it." The words stung, not because they were new, but because they felt true. Ethan had been running from himself as much as from them. He peered around the boulder, spotting Silas's silhouette against the canyon's rim. Ethan raised his rifle, his hand steady despite the ache in his chest. He didn't want to kill again, but Silas's words had lit a fire. Anger, guilt, and something fiercer, tied to the promise he'd made Clara. He fired, the shot echoing like thunder, and Silas staggered, clutching his chest. As he fell, Ethan felt no relief, only the weight of another life taken. The canyon went quiet, but Ethan knew Jasper was still out there, and the fight was far from over. The canyon's walls pressed closer, their shadows swallowing what little light remained. Ethan staggered through the narrow pass, blood dripping from his side, each step a fight against the pain tearing through him. The air was thick with the metallic tang of his own blood, mixed with the dry dust kicked up by his boots. Silas's body lay behind him, but the echo of his words still rang in Ethan's ears, mocking his hope for a new start. Jasper was out there, the last of his hunters, and Ethan knew this fight would end with one of them dead. A shadow moved ahead, quick and deliberate, and Ethan's heart lurched. Jasper stepped into view, his revolver already drawn, his eyes glinting with a hatred that had festered for years. "You're a hard man to kill, Ethan," Jasper said, his voice low, almost calm, like they were sharing a drink instead of staring down death. "But you ain't slipping away this time." Ethan raised his rifle, his hands slick with sweat, his vision blurring at the edges. The wound in his side burned, blood soaking his shirt, but he held his ground. "You never could let it go," Ethan said, his voice rough, each word a struggle. "I didn't take your life, Jasper." "You threw it away." Jasper's face twisted, his grip tightening on the gun. "You left me with nothing," he spat. "You think you can walk away, play house with that woman? You're a dead man, walking." The words cut deep, not just for their venom, but for the truth they carried. Ethan's promise to Clara felt like a dream he couldn't hold on to. Jasper fired first, the bullet grazing Ethan's shoulder, sending a fresh wave of pain through him. Ethan dropped to one knee, firing back, his shot hitting Jasper in the leg. Jasper stumbled but didn't fall, his curse echoing off the canyon walls. Ethan forced himself up, his body screaming, and charged, tackling Jasper into the dirt. They grappled, fists and blood, the revolver skittering across the ground. Ethan's strength was fading, but Clara's face flashed in his mind, her defiance, her trust, and he drove his elbow into Jasper's jaw. Jasper went limp, his breath ragged, but Ethan felt the world tilt as blood poured from his side. He staggered to his feet, clutching the canyon wall, his rifle lost in the fight. Jasper was down, maybe dead, but Ethan didn't check. Every step back toward the cabin was a battle, his promise to Clara the only thing pulling him forward. The canyon silence closed around him, and he stumbled on, driven by a vow that felt heavier than the life draining out of him. The horizon glowed faint orange as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valley. Ethan stumbled through the trees, his hand pressed against his side, blood slick between his fingers. Each breath was a knife, his vision swimming, but the cabin's outline in the distance kept him moving. The air smelled of pine and earth, sharp against the coppery tang of his wounds. His promise to Clara echoed in his head, a lifeline pulling him through the haze of pain. He'd told her he'd be back by dawn, and he wasn't about to break his word. Clara stood outside the cabin, her revolver at her side, scanning the ridge for any sign of him. The night's gunfire had faded, but the silence felt heavier, like the world was holding its breath. When she saw Ethan's staggering form, her heart lurched. She ran to him, her boots kicking up dust, and caught him as he swayed, his weight nearly pulling her down. "You damn fool," she said, her voice thick with relief and fear. His face was pale, his eyes glassy, but he managed a weak grin. "Told you I'd make it," he rasped. She half-dragged him inside, the fire's warmth a stark contrast to his cold skin. Blood soaked his shirt, pooling on the floor as she eased him onto the pallet. "Stay with me," she said, her hands working fast, ripping cloth to press against his wound. Her fingers shook, not from inexperience, but from the fear she couldn't hide anymore. Ethan's hand grabbed hers, weak but firm. "I said I'd make you mistress of my house," he whispered, each word a struggle. "I kept my word." Clara's throat tightened, tears burning her eyes as she pressed harder on the wound, blood seeping through the cloth. "Don't you dare die on me," she said, her voice breaking, raw with everything she hadn't said. She saw the fight in his eyes fading, replaced by something softer. Peace, maybe, or surrender. His gaze held hers, steady despite the pain, and she felt the weight of his promise, heavy as the blood on her hands. "You're home," he murmured, his voice barely a breath. The fire crackled. its light flickering across his face as his eyes fluttered shut. Clara kept pressing, her hands slick, whispering his name like a prayer. She didn't know if he heard her, but she clung to the hope that he'd hold on. The cabin walls seemed to close in, the world shrinking to just the two of them, his promise hanging in the air like a vow sealed in blood. She wouldn't let him go, not yet, not after everything they'd fought for. Spring crept into the valley, soft green budding on the hills where winter's grip had faded. The cabin stood quiet, its weathered logs bathed in morning light, but the air carried a heaviness no season could lift. Clara knelt by a patch of earth near the stream, her hands rough from months of work, hammering nails into fresh-cut timber for a house she'd started building alone. The smell of damp soil and new wood clung to her, a reminder of the promise that kept her going. Ethan's grave was nearby, marked by a simple stone, the only piece of him she could hold on to. She worked in silence, her movements steady but her eyes distant, replaying his last words by the firelight. "I made you mistress of my house," he'd whispered, his voice weak but sure, as if death couldn't break his vow. Clara had held him as he slipped away, her tears falling on his blood-streaked face, begging him to stay. But he was gone by dawn, leaving her with a promise that felt like both a gift and a curse. She'd buried him herself, her hands blistered from the shovel, her heart heavy with questions she'd never answer. The valley was peaceful now, the threat of Jasper and his men buried with the winter snows. Clara had found their tracks days after Ethan's death, their bodies cold in the canyon, proof he'd fought to keep her safe. But peace didn't ease the ache in her chest. She hammered another nail, the sound sharp in the quiet, and thought of the life they might have had. A home, a future, something beyond survival. "You promised me," she muttered, her voice low, as if he could still hear her. A breeze stirred the grass, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers, and Clara paused, wiping sweat from her brow. She looked at the half-built frame of the house, its shape rising against the hills, and felt his presence in every board she'd laid. His vow had changed her, turned her grief into something solid, something she could build. But it also haunted her, a reminder of what she'd lost. She stood brushing dirt from her hands and gazed at the stone by the stream. "You kept your word," she said softly, her voice steady but raw. "Now I'm keeping mine." The valley stretched out, endless and quiet, and Clara went back to work, each swing of her hammer a step toward the home he'd promised. She was alone, but not empty. His words lived in her, a legend born of love and loss. The house would stand, a testament to a vow that turned tragedy into something enduring, even if it broke her heart to build it.